Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Demystifying 45th GST Council meeting. So last Friday, we had GST Council meeting in which many changes have been made, and that's the reason we are having a special webinar on that. So if I have to summarize the GST Council meeting, apart from revenue augmentation, the clear intent of GST Council that GST should become a simple law, it should be free from disputes, that was clearly visible. So on those lines, many of the changes in rate of GST on goods and services, GST law, and even the compliances have been made. So with this background, we'll start our today's webinar. And I'm joined by my colleague Parul, who is a senior research associate in our firm. So Parul will be taking us through various important changes made in this council meeting. One thing I want to highlight is that the changes are many. So every company or every sector has some impact due to these changes. So over to you, Parul.
Thank you, Puneet. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Puneet said, the changes were many, but we have covered only those that were of key importance. We have divided our discussion into four parts. First, we'll be discussing the changes pertaining to GST rates, then law related, and then compliance related. At the end, we'll be having the live Q&A round wherein we'll be addressing all the queries that you have. So starting with the rates related changes, the first change is relating to railway parts, locomotive, and other goods. So these parts were covered under Chapter 86, and now the rate has been increased to 18%, from 12% to 18%. We all know that this change has been recommended to settle the disputes that have arose after the Supreme Court ruling in the case of Westinghouse, wherein the Supreme Court held that relays are to be classified under the Chapter 86 instead of Chapter 85, which was attracting higher GST rate, and the same will be classifiable at the rate of 12%. So to settle those kind of disputes and the benefit wherein it arose because of 12% versus 18% GST rate, the government has recommended to increase the rate from 12 to 18%. But the disputes are not ended fully, because say if the parts are attracting 28% of GST rate, then again this tax rate arbitrage still exists and disputes are likely to continue.
So just to add on this, so examples of 28% can be air conditioners in railways. So where disputes come. So in nutshell, the government has made HSN or classification irrelevant for most of the railway parts. So whether they go under Chapter 85, 90 or 86, the rate will be same. Another takeaway from this ruling is that similar disputes are also taken for automotive sector, where Chapter 87 attracts 28% and respective chapters like 85, 90, etc. attracts 18%. So this amendment also indicates that because the government has made amendment only for the railway sector and have not touched anything on automotive parts, so government is likely to continue with the disputes based on Westinghouse judgment and demand 28% GST on automotive parts.
So Puneet, the second change is related to laboratory regions. So now the rate has been clarified to be 12%. So this is again to settle the disputes that arose because of various advanced rulings that are there under the GST regime, whether these laboratory regions are to be covered under Chapter 3822 or not. So 3822, as you all know, covers all laboratory and diagnostic region. So there were ambiguity whether they has it will cover both, like it has to be diagnostic along with laboratory, or just the laboratory will be covered under this chapter. So now the government has made a welcome recommendation by saying that it will cover laboratory regions, and this will be covered under 12% of GST bracket instead of 18%. As far as carbonated fruit beverages or fruit drink and beverages with fruit juice is concerned, the government has recommended the rate of 28% and 12% of compensation cess. Now, again, there were various ambiguities in the past due to different advanced rulings. So, the department was likely to cover these beverages into aerated drinks that were attracting this higher rate. Now, the government has again clarified that it will be covered as the aerated drink, attracting the rate of 28% along with compensation cess of 12%.
So one important point relating to this is these carbonated beverages. In pre-GST regime, there are multiple rulings, including Supreme Court ruling in case of Parle beverages, as per which it was classifiable as fruit-based beverage only, attracting lower rate of tax. And similar legal position was holding in GST regime also. So with this amendment, the contrary advanced rulings, they have been settled. But DGGSTI is undertaking investigation against a lot of these manufacturers for the past period.
Now, the another issue that was there in the recent past was relating to external batteries when sold along with UPS or inverter. So, will they be qualified to be a composite supply or not? Now, the government has amended by saying that batteries other than lithium ion would attract 28% when they are sold along with the UPS inverter, and the UPS inverter will be attracting 18%. But here the question arises, if say a transaction actually by essence qualifies to be a composite supply, then as per the composite supply, the all the other ancillary supplies that are there along with the main supply should be taxed at the rate of the main supply. But can Puneet, they can make such change wherein they have created an artificial bifurcation of the composite supplies?
So a very valid point, Parul, because firstly, we need to characterize the nature of supply, whether it's a composite supply or not. And as per the composite supply provisions, once it qualifies as a composite supply, whatever is a principal supply, tax rate according to that has to be applied. So as far as these cases are concerned, here the principal supply is of UPS system or inverters only. Therefore, a single rate of 18% should apply. So to that extent, this amendment may not be legally correct because it will presuppose bifurcation of prices. Suppose a company is selling a complete alternate power supply solution consisting of UPS system and batteries for a single price, and it will presuppose you need to break up into UPS value, batteries value, and apply respective rates. So to that extent, maybe the intent is to overcome contrary advanced ruling in case of switching LVO, but legally it seems to be incorrect. Just one point, Parul, I want to highlight in the last slide is that, and many of the companies or taxpayers are having these doubts. So in GST Council's press release for all these amendments, it has been written that these are clarificatory amendments. So there is a doubt whether these amendments will apply prospectively or retrospectively. So even some of the clients, they approached us asking, should they stop billing or start billing at a higher rate of tax? So just to clarify, one, this is a press release. A formal notification will be issued. So notification in law likelihood will be effective from 1st October. So it will not have any impact on the current billing. Secondly, all these changes, when the government say clarificatory, we understand that the clarificatory means that they don't want any ambiguity for the future. But at least from the press release, it is not appearing that this is a retrospective amendment. In fact, if you see some parts of the press release, say for example, 70-30 value ratio for renewable power, or say for example, interest on unutilized ITC, etc. They have specifically said that these are retrospective amendments, whereas the set of amendments in front of you, the government has not said so. So in our view, it should be prospective only.
Now, going forward, the next change is pertaining to electronic commerce operators. Now, they have been made liable to discharge tax on restaurant services, and this will be effective from January 2022. Also, the ice cream parlors that are selling already manufactured ice creams would attract 18% of GST. Now, here the question arises, wherein these ECO, for example, Swiggy, Zomato, they are delivering goods. So it's basically a sale of packaged commodity which are carrying a food item which is delivered to the customer. So will they qualify to be a restaurant services or a sale of good is again a question. So what's your view on this, Puneet?
Yeah, so Parul, a very valid point, because if we see firstly the ECO amendment, what they have done is they have only changed the person liable to pay tax, in the sense that the liability to pay tax will be on say ECO and not respective restaurants. So it will come with its own complications if it's a 5% without ITC and all those things. So all compliances will fall under ECO. Second, the principal issue is that because these Zomato and Swiggy, they only pick up the food from the restaurant and deliver it at customer's place. This is essentially sale of goods only, which is a food. And this controversy arose in respect of service tax regime only. Also, and recently, in case of Anjappar, Madras High Court held that this qualifies as sale of goods. So, in our view, making person liable to pay tax amendment is fine. But if we go on the essence of the amendment, essence of the nature of transaction, it is supply of goods only, not supply of services. To that extent, the government needs to change the law to deem it as supply of services. And in our view, same logic will hold true for ice cream parlors as well, because ice creams will qualify as sale of goods only.
Right. Even if we test the dominant intention, therein also the customer perceives to buy goods. There is no service element that is involved apart from the delivery, which is
Right.
already
Right.
taxable. Now, coming to the law related changes, in law related changes, we will be covering the recent circulars that came day before yesterday. So we'll be covering the circular that was there on intermediary, ITC on debit notes, export of services, and other changes that have been brought in. First, the circular on intermediary. So for the intermediary transactions, will they qualify to be an intermediary or not? The circular clearly laid down 4 tests that a taxpayer has to check whether they are satisfying or say clearing those tests or not. If yes, then the transaction would qualify to be an intermediary, otherwise not. The person would qualify to be an intermediary rather. So the first is there should be the presence of minimum 3%. So for example, ABC, it should be there. Like, okay. Then the next is there should be 2 distinct supplies. So say if B is supplying to A in a service of just identifying customers, then this is one supply. And say A post identification is supplying goods to C, the identified customer. So there are 2 supplies. So the supply of goods is the main supply, whereas the identification of customer is the ancillary supply. So it says there should be 2 distinct supplies. The next is the person must have a character of agent, broker, or any other similar person. So say B is issuing invoice to A and A is issuing invoice to C. Now B is just an agent who is helping, facilitating a service in locating of customers. So must be charging a commission. So the transaction should be such that it should be structured in such a way that the person B should act like an agent only. And the last is B, in our example, should not supply goods on his own account. For example, the supply is from A to C, not B to C. So these are the 4 tests that one needs to check. So if we see different categories of transactions, for example, if a person is simply facilitating a main supply, let's take another example. Let Puneet be a service provider and you be a customer, right? And you are in India and Puneet is outside India. So Puneet appoints me just to identify or say locate you, and then he's supplying the services to you. Then in such a scenario, I will qualify to be an intermediary. Now see another example. Puneet outsources his work to me. He says, I won't supply, you supply on my behalf to you. Then this outsourcing or the subcontracting wherein I am making the main supply. Now Puneet is not making the main supply, but I am making the main supply. This will won't, then I won't qualify to be an intermediary. Then third is, say Puneet has a back office in India who is providing the administrative support to Puneet. Then in such a scenario, again, this is not an intermediary case. So Puneet, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. So Parul, actually, the government firstly created a lot of controversies and now they are clarifying. So the four conditions which they have laid down in the circular are part of the statutory provisions also. But yes, this circular is a welcome relief for BPOs and many companies, etc., who are facing disputes on this. So in many of these cases, three persons exist. But yes, the circular has rightly clarified that, say, a case of commission agent who facilitates mean supply, that will only be an intermediary. There may be other situations also like outsourcing, subcontracting, etc., like the examples you gave, where actually three people may be involved. In the sense, I may be supplying services to a client, but in turn, I'm getting work done from you. Or say, for example, a back office is being appointed by a client, but he's calling end customers, etc. So mere existence of three people is not a sin, but yes, the underlying transaction needs to be seen whether facilitation of main supply is there or not. The circular also clarifies that because these back office operations, outsourcing, etc., is not covered as intermediary. So this clearly indicates that facilitation of main supply needs to be seen in a narrower sense rather than a wider sense, which department was doing, in the sense that everything becomes a facilitation of main supply. So to that extent, it's a very, very favorable circular. Last point I want to add is that this circular is actually covering very, very straightforward and simple situations. But when we deal with real life situations, the situations are very complex. And again, those have to be fought based on what law says, what principles have been laid down in the circular, service tax or GST jurisprudence as well.
Yeah. Now, coming to the another circular that was issued pertaining to ITC on debit notes. So we all know that the Section 16 of CGST Act defines the due date by when a taxpayer can avail the ITC. Now, with respect to debit notes, there has been an issue whether the relevant financial year has to be seen from the date of debit note or date of original invoice. Like it says that no, so earlier the 16.4 section said that the ITC won't be allowed after the due date of filing of GSTR 3B for the month of September post the end of financial year when the invoice was issued or invoice relating to such debit note pertains. And the second clause was furnishing of annual return, whichever is earlier. On 1st of January, this amendment came wherein invoices relating to such was omitted. Now here the issue arose whether we have to see the date of original invoice or the date of issuance of debit note. So as per the circular, it clearly clarified that it has to be the date of debit note. However, let's understand with the help of few scenarios just to have a more clarification regarding this circular. So the first scenario, let's take the pre-amendment case wherein there was no amendment and you have to see the financial year uh, for the date when the original invoice relating to such invoice pertains has been issued. So let's take an example of 2 years, 1920 financial year and 2021. Say invoice was issued on July 15, 2019 and debit note issued on 10th of November 2020. Now, as per the law, the pre-amended law, the relevant financial year would be 2019 to 2020 instead of 2021. That is the date of issuance of original invoice. Now in scenario 2, that is post-amendment and pre-circular, say the financial years are 2021 and 21-22. Now the amendment came in January 1, 2021. The original invoice issued on March 15, 2021 and debit note issued on June 10, 2021. Now here Since that phrase invoice pertaining to such debit note got omitted, the relevant financial year would be 2021 to 2022, which is your date of issuance of debit note. Now, this circular.
So here, just one thing, Parul, I want to add. Even though the law was very clear that date of debit note has to be raised, but still advanced ruling in case of ITEC Plast, they said that even after amendment has been made, we will read the provisions in a similar way, that we will consider a date of issuance of invoice as the relevant date. So that was legally incorrect, the advanced ruling, but yes, created a lot of confusion, and that was a need of issuance of circular.
Right. They discussed about the debit note not being an independent document,
Right,
and that is
right.
what led to the issuance of this circular. Now, this circular made along with, see, the two events were, as per the law, they were the date of issuance of debit notes, date of issuance of underlying invoice. But with this circular, one date also becomes important, that is your date of claiming of ITC. So what will happen? Now, see, invoice has been, the amendment came on January 1, 2021, as we discussed, and invoice is issued on July 15, 2019, and debit note is issued on November 10, and say the person hasn't claimed the ITC yet. So for such a person, the relevant financial year would be 2020 to 21. That is the issuance of debit note date. Now, if say the person has claimed the ITC on December 20, that is pre-amendment period. He has claimed the ITC. Now, in such a scenario, for such a taxpayer, the relevant financial year would be 1920. That is the date of issuance of original invoice. So a lot of confusion, Parul. I think the straightforward issue the government has made it quite complicated. So if we have to summarize a legal position prior to January 2021, in our view, the correct legal position was that date of issuance of original invoice was the relevant date. After the amendment, the date of debit note was relevant. So in our view, any debit notes dated January 1, 2021 or later will be eligible for ITC based on date of debit note only. But strangely and legally incorrectly, the circular has made a criteria of date of claiming ITC. So very legally, if you see, if someone has not claimed ITC on debit notes of 17, 18 or 18, 19 till now, because they were time barred or he missed that, etc. Because he is claiming ITC today, so he can claim ITC on all those debit notes. On the other hand, if someone was not eligible for ITC, but he wrongly took, like the example in front of you, because the debit note is dated November 10th, based on original invoice, etc., the date was passed on December 20th when the ITC was taken, then he is not eligible for ITC. But yes, being a favorable circular, taxpayers can consider taking advantage of this. But if you ask legally it's totally incorrect. It should be seen from the date of debit note only. Now let's come to another circular that is there on the export of services. So there has been an ambiguity regarding the section 2(6) and clause 5 of IGST Act, like what would qualify to be a mere establishments of a distinct person. So let's quickly take a look at what the law says about it. Section 265 of IGST defines export of services with 5 clauses. Like first, the provider has to be in India, recipient has to be outside India. There should be a receipt of forex, for the place of supply should fall outside India. And the 5th clause, which is meant for today's discussion, is the supplier and recipient shouldn't be merely establishments of a distinct person. Now, what becomes merely establishments of a distinct person takes us to explanation 1 to section 8 of IGST Act, in which there is one clause which says an establishment in India and any other establishment outside India would consider to be a establishments of a distinct person. And then explanation 2 of to section 8 says that a person carrying a business through, say, branch, agency, representational office in any territory would be treated as an establishment of a distinct person. So this is the law. Now, what circular has clarified, before going to the circular, there is presently an FAQ which says that if an Indian arm if an Indian arm has been located as a branch office or say representational office, then those will be considered as a mere establishments of a distinct person. But say if such an Indian arm is a subsidiary or a group concern, then they won't be treated as a mere establishments. Rather, they'll be treated as a separate legal person because they both have been registered under different acts of the different territories, so they are different persons altogether, not the mere establishments of a distinct person. The same logic was there in this Gujarat High Court ruling pertaining to service tax regime, which also held the same principle. Now, what circular has done, circular has clarified this thing only. Say if a office situated outside India has an office in India, which is acting like a branch office or say agency or representation office, then same will be considered or treated as establishment of distinct person. But say if such Indian office is a subsidiary, sister concern or a group concern, then they'll be treated as a separate legal person. And the same is also clear from the definition of person that is there under the IGST Act, which covers company and any body corporate that are being registered under any law of countries outside India to be a separate legal person. So they cannot be held to be a mere establishment of a distinct person. Henceforth, this type of a transaction should qualify to be an export or service if such subsidiary company is providing any services to the head of to the parent company. Now, Puneet, what do you think this analogy can be drawn for head office, branch office transactions that are happening in India?
Yeah. So, Parul, again, this controversy never existed, but department was making because when they say establishment of same person, so it means that the legal entity should remain the same. And that's why the correct legal position was that if the company is different, then this bar of being establishment of same legal entity did not apply. The only part which I feel relevant in this circular is that circular has reiterated that whatever transactions happen between these head offices and branch offices, these qualify as supply. In our view, this is incorrect, and specifically for Indian and overseas head office, branch office transactions, there is ample jurisprudence, and say specifically for employee cost and software companies, etc., that because the employees belong to the company as a whole, there is no provision of service between these head office and branch office. So, to that extent, this part of clarification is incorrect. Otherwise, yes, the unnecessary issue which department was raising by treating these different legal entities as well as establishment of same person, those will be put to rest now.
Right. Now coming to the other law related changes. So section 16 of IGST, under section 16, they have notified mentha oil to be exported only against the LUT. So 16.4 gives power to the government to notify few class of goods that can be imported on payment of goods. But now they have notified mentha oil, recommended to notify mentha oil to be exported against LUT. So what do you think? Is this correct since 16.4 is not yet notified?
Yeah, so Parul, a valid point. So in all likelihood, they will notify section 16.4 also, and mentha oil will be the first category of goods on which payment of IGST on exports and refund will not be allowed. So they need to notify that, and it will be very important for especially exporters to keep a watch which other goods, etc., government notifies for 16.4.
Now the next is pertaining to Rule 36.4. So the government said that the 36.4, wherein the 5% buffer is still available, would be amended once section 16.2AA will be notified, wherein they'll be just allowing the ITC that is available on invoice debit notes that are reflecting in GSTR 2T. So no more buffer of 5% would be available in future. The next is relating to interest. Section 53, therein where they have amended by saying that ineligible ITC availed and utilized would attract interest at the rate of 18%, and this change has been recommended to be made effectively from July 2017. A retrospective amendment has been proposed. So there has been various issues that we have seen in past, that the department was charging interest for even the ineligible ITC that has been availed but not utilized. So now the government has made a clarification, although they had made it earlier also. And again, the earlier they used to say the department has recovered the interest at the rate of 24%. Like we have seen practically, the department are charging 24% instead of 18%. Then can they go for a refund?
So Parul, many of these amendments, when they come, and wherever the government wants to grant interest refund for the past, so the retrospective amendment will also allow refund. In any case, be it 24%, 18% difference, or say a taxpayer who did not utilize the ITC but paid interest, so even that person will be entitled for refund either under retrospective amendment or under normal refund provisions.
The next is pertaining to Section 77 of CGST Act. So the council meeting has recommended the changes that needs to be made just to remove the ambiguities that have existed so far regarding its time limit and procedure of refund filing. So will 2-year time limit for filing refund would apply or not? All these clarifications soon to be made. Now coming to the last section, the compliance related changes. The first change is pertaining to the e-invoice. So the the government has now clarified that the person is not required to carry the physical tax invoice in case the invoice has been generated. Simple showing of QR code would suffice. No need of carrying physical tax invoice. Now, GSTR 1 cannot be filed if 3B of preceding month is not furnished. So presently, if 3B for past 2 months have not been filed, then the one is blocked. But from January 2022, even if for a past 1 month it is not filed, GSTR 1 is likely to be blocked. So we must ensure that we are filing GSTR 3B timely. Now the frequency of filing ITC 04 has been relaxed. If the aggregate turnover of a taxpayer in the preceding financial year is greater than say 5 crores, then it has to be filed half yearly, and if it's less than or equal to 5 crores, then yearly. The fourth one is regarding to the late fee. If the late fee for delayed filing of GSTR 1 will be auto-populated and collected along with the filing of GSTR 3B for the very next month. The last is the unutilized balance in CGST and IGST electronic cash ledger shall be allowed to be transferred between the distinct persons without following any refund procedures.
So thank you everyone for joining today's session. Yeah.
Thank you.